Now we're streaming to YouTube as well, so we look like we're in good shape there. We've got a small, about 30-second lag like we discussed yesterday.
Okay.
So it would probably work best if we get about 9:59 my time. We can kick off. That way we should go right live at 10 on YouTube as well.
Perfect.
So thank you once again for doing this, Hal. I'll give a quick intro like I normally do for the podcast, and then I'm going to turn the whole shooting match over to you.
That's perfect, buddy. So are you letting in participants in now? You've got 52, oh, 53. They can just join themselves, can they?
Yes, sir. I decided not to limit anything with waiting rooms or anything like that. I didn't want to slow people down with a registration or anything of that nature.
Okay.
I'm going to jump back over to YouTube for a second to check something.
Okay, buddy.
It looks like we have 7 folks watching on YouTube as well. For all the participants watching on Zoom and also on YouTube, welcome. We'll be kicking off in about 2 minutes. I appreciate your patience. This is the first time the commander's voice has tried to go live. There's been a couple of not glitches, but a very steep learning curve over the past couple of days, and particularly in the past 30 minutes. So once again, thank you very much for your patience, and we'll be going live in 1 minute now. Thank you. Professor Sosabowski, you're ready to proceed.
I am, and we're getting some nice positive reinforcement in terms of sound. And yeah, can you just confirm that I'm lit appropriately? Because it's the thing. The thing is, it's sunny now, but by the time the lecture's finished, it'll be dark. So I've got all the lights on anyway. So I hope we can. I hope it'll stay relatively constant.
Yeah, your lighting looks great from here. You look
Thank
terrific.
you.
Yeah, I mean, you can see the major decoration. So if we're ready to proceed, just very quickly, good morning, everybody in United States. Good afternoon, everybody in the UK and Europe, and hello to anybody else tuning in from around the world. This is Ben Powers coming at you from a really super special episode of the Commander's Voice. This is our first live stream, and I'm really, really pleased, chuffed, as my English friends would say, to welcome Professor Hal Sosabowski back to the show. Hal is probably the most knowledgeable person on the life of General Stanislaw and the first Polish Independent Parachute Regiment that I know. He's a great friend of the show, and I'm very pleased to have met him. So, Hal, I'd like to turn this over to you. If you could kick off by explaining your relationship to the General, then proceed with your lecture. We're ready to go.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so good morning in America and good evening in Europe. And I'm really well aware we've got a really, really cosmopolitan audience today. There's Poles, Dutch, Americans, British, and I'm sure a whole lot more. So I think it's the first time we've had effectively the lecture going out across a whole seminar. So I'm Hal Sosabowski. I'm a professor at the University of Brighton, which isn't that relevant because I'm the great-grandson of General Stanislaw Sosabowski, who we'll be talking about now. And what I'll do is I'm just going to have that very awkward moment when I try and share my screen. So I'm going to ask Ben for lots of positive reinforcement when I do share it, because I'm hoping you can see the title slide. Can someone confirm we can see a title slide?
You can definitely see the title slide, yeah.
Okay. So what a pleasure. I bumped into Ben, I think, on Twitter, but we got talking and I did the podcast before Christmas, and I thought it was Twitter talk, come and do the show for everyone, but it wasn't. And here we are today, and what a pleasure it is. So what I'd like to do is just tell you a little bit about what we'll be doing today. It's a real pleasure because for the 82nd, the airborne signal chapter for the 82nd, we'll be talking about the 82nd throughout the lecture. This is me. I think we'll have the email address towards the end of the lecture as well, but feel free to jot it down. And I need to sort of tell you what we're going to be doing. The introductions are, so I'm Hal, I'm your speaker today, and the rules of engagement are, I'm going to disagree with my host. I'm probably not the most knowledgeable person about the life of General Sosabowski, because there are absolute enthusiasts who know his shirt collar size to the nth degree. And so the only reason I'm really here is by virtue of my surname. And much of my lecture is the work of others who I'll be acknowledging in due course. But if you know better than me, send me a nice email afterwards or chat in the Q&As. Every now and then a market garden expert barrels in, and we end up having to bump heads in the middle of a lecture, which is a little bit unseemly. So the lecture is divided into 4 sections, and it is a long lecture. It's effectively the thick end of 2 hours, but being as it's on Zoom, we can come and go as we please, or rather you can come and go as you please, and no offense is taken. So the early part of the lecture is the General's early life and how he formed the Parachute Brigade. And then we're going to get straight into a strategic analysis of Operation Market Garden. And that's largely based on facts, well, it should be, of course. And we'll be talking about where the information comes from and so on and so forth. But we can unpick it in the Q&A. Then we'll be talking about what the Polish Independent Parachute Brigade did at Operation Market Garden. And I'll be telling you a little bit of the stuff they didn't show you on A Bridge Too Far. And finally, the very personal bit for me is 2 brief and affectionate biographies of not only the General, but his son, because his son was a war hero too, but because he was such a modest chap, he never really spoke about his achievements, and I'm here to put that right. So I'm going to ask you to pin your ears back and give a voice to Dr. Major S.J. Stanislaw Sosabowski, who was a hero of the Warsaw Uprising in many, many ways. I'd like to tell you about my glittering military career. because of course there isn't one. I'm here only by virtue of my surname, and my uniform service, such as it was, is limited to some time in the Metropolitan Police back in the 1990s. That's me with my wooden top, and that, yeah, I didn't have many girlfriends then, and I don't know, it's a mystery. I can't tell why. Anyway, so I'm not a soldier, and I need to underscore the following, because from time to time I get the odd acerbic Twitter. I'll be telling you about the achievements of others, about my great-grandfather and my grandfather. I am merely the rapporteur. I'm here to tell you. So every now and then I give a lecture and someone says, you're trying to make a name for yourself, talking about your relatives. I'm not. I've made a name for myself in a completely different way by doing that. It's connected with the general in terms of causing explosions. Maybe that's something in our DNA, but I'm a professor of public understanding of science at the University of Brighton. And I teach pharmacists about their craft, but also I do a lot of international science shows around the world. And I really love what I do. And I'm a chemist by virtue of the fact that I did chemistry, but my passion is conveying science to others, and also ridiculing my follically challenged assistant by setting fire to his head. So that's enough about me. Today's not about me at all. It's about the Major and the General. You might have noticed my single decoration was awarded for feats of absolute heroism, all of which were conducted with a computer, a laser pointer, and a marker pen. Yes, I was given the gold badge of the Polish Parachute Association for my lectures. And it's quite sweet, really, because the General got the first one and I was awarded the last one. And I wear that with absolute pride. And it's my family duty and pleasure to do the lectures, but it's far more a pleasure than it is a duty. I need to put on the table some acknowledgements to military historians whose knowledge is far greater than my own. I'll tell you a little bit about them in due course, but it's Sergeant Dariusz Krakowiak, Inspector Simon Elmer, and Colonel Mike Russell. Darek was the chap who introduced me to lectures about the General, and many of the photographs are from his personal collection. Simon, he's an Englishman who's more Polish than Nicholas Copernicus. He's got the Order of Merit from the Polish government for his work in promoting Polish culture and military history in the UK. And lastly, Michael Russell, Colonel Russell, an ex-para who's, again, he says he's not a military historian, but he is, and he writes about the General and the Brigade, and hopefully he's joined us today. I also need to point out that Against the Tide TV is a Polish TV company who are making their efforts to promote the General, and it's really sweet because they're young, and that's important to me, because one of the things that worries me now is that young people in general, and young Poles in particular, are interested in TikTok and iPhone 12s. They're not that interested, perhaps, in military history, and the veterans are starting to die now, and soon there won't be any veterans left, and it's our duty to keep the memory of their sacrifice alive by attending events such as this. So you can be reassured that I'm not an imposter, an imposter-bosky, if you will. That's our family tree. I am the great-grandson of the General. His son was Dr. Major Sosabowski. My father, Michael Sosabowski, was one of twins that Dr. Major Sosabowski had. Sadly, my uncle died in Portugal about 8 or 9 years ago, and I have a cousin called Jeremy Sosabowski, who's also an academic, and he works on some electrical thing. I don't know, it's too detailed and too technical for me, but he's an academic in Cambridge. That there is a very famous photograph for us because it's called the Four Generations. If I can introduce you from the left, from our left, wearing the blue suit is Dr. Major Sosabowski. Wearing the brown suit is the General, just before he died. Wearing the brown waistcoat and black suit combination is my father, and standing on my father's left is my uncle. Of course, in the white, that's me. So that's a very famous picture. The General died when I was 2, and he died because he was stubborn and obstinate and didn't take his nitroglycerin tablets for his heart condition. Okay, so we'll see that that's a character feature of the General, and that Gene Hackman got it right. So let's talk about a bit of history. So this is part 1. And if you're interested in where the general came from and his younger years, this is for you. And it all starts in Stanislaw. He was born in 1892. His father was a railway worker, and that's interesting because in those days, railway workers were kind of almost upper middle class. And he had a brother and a sister, but sadly, his father died when he was quite young, and he took over the running of the family and saw himself very much as the man of the family. And money started to become in short supply, so they moved house. And each time they moved house, they moved from the nicer parts of town to the less nice parts of town. And the general, not that he was a general then, of course, he would make money for the family by coaching his classmates. And he would walk to school reading a book because he didn't have time to read books later on. He'd attend classes. When there was playtime or lunchtime, he'd be looking at the books of his classmates. And so very early in his life, he had some sort of leadership role, which he adopted. And he was contemplative, quiet, wise, and contemplative, but very quickly started finding some sort of joy in two things. First of all, mountain climbing in the Carpathian Mountains, and also joining the Scouts. So there was an element of uniformed service and or the outdoor life. That's more pictures of the scouting. And again, very quickly, he then, that's on the left-hand side, that's when he was graduating. But on the right-hand side, he's wearing the uniform of the Austrian army. And as you probably know, Poland has almost got a very fluid border, depending on who wants to take Polish real estate for themselves. And what happened was the Austrian army conscripted Poles and put them in uniforms so they could fight other Poles wearing Russian uniforms. So effectively, both Austria and Russia had Poles fighting for themselves, but he very quickly became a soldier, and he was a career soldier. So his only job in his life until he retired was being a soldier. But straight away, we can see the Sosabowski frown, which I'll be talking more about later. And in 1915, he was injured, and in particular, his first sort of big campaign was defending the Austrian fortress city of Przemyśl. And I had to actually ask someone how to pronounce the word Przemyśl this morning because it looks almost impronounceable. And it was a really ghastly battle over a long period of time. And when they eventually left the fortress, they said that barely one single street lamp didn't have a hanging soldier who'd been executed by the Russians. This is him in the 1920s, and he was one of three of a battalion of 250 who survived in the First World War. And after the war, Warsaw became the Paris of the East, and he was given the opportunity to be a staff lecturer at the Polish General Staff College. And he wrote some books, and those books were used as standard curriculum text for the conscripts and the recruits. And this is just some acknowledgements for the next picture, which I think is absolutely delightful. It's a staff picture for the Staff College, and I've just sort of focused in on the general, and you can sort of see already the pride resplendent in his staff uniform, which sort of set him down his career path, which would end up with him being a major general and have formed his own parachute brigade. That's just the attendance list, and I put it there for the sake of completion. So now we come to 1938 and 1939, when the war broke out and the Germans stroke Nazis invaded Poland and went straight for Warsaw. And straight away, the general, who was the officer in charge of the 21st Children of Warsaw Regiment, engaged in heavy fighting, for which he was decorated a bit later on, but I'll talk about that at a different time. But he and his son both fought, but in different ways. He fought above ground, and his son, Dr. Major Sosabowski, fought below ground. He fought in the underground. So Major Sosabowski went to the underground. The general was eventually captured, but he wasn't going to stay captured. He promptly escaped and via a very circuitous route ended up back in the UK. But it was bitter fighting in Grochow in Warsaw in 1939, and he went to the Zyrodov prisoner of war camp. From there, went to Budapest, Italy, Paris, and then on a ship called the Abdipol. And the Abdipol was a very, very important piece of maritime craft because it carried north of 3,000 people, most of whom were the soldiers of the 4th Polish Infantry Division. So they were effectively retreating and going back or going to the UK. And this is important because straight from the off, their duty and their mission was to liberate Warsaw. And when they arrived, they were sent to Scotland because the British didn't really know what to do with them. Now, most of my lecture is cold, hard facts, and I'd like to think of it as a semi-academic work. And the last thing I want you to think is a partisan crusade to restore the good name of my great-grandfather. It will be a little bit of that, but we'll get to that a bit later on. But the reality is the British didn't really know what to do with the Poles, so they sent them to Scotland. Broadly, I think it was described as to sort of protect Scotland from a potential invasion, as if Scotland was the first place that the Nazis would think of invading. But straight away, General Maciek and General Paszkiewicz wanted the cream of the recruits, we'll call them, and Sosabowski had the rest. So he had the very young soldiers, the ill ones, the undernourished ones, and even the criminal ones. But he said, you know what, I don't care. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make the best of what I've got, and I'm going to lick them into some sort of fighting force. And notice there's no mention of parachutes yet. We'll come on to that in a little bit. And so he was given permission to create what was then called the Canadian Rifle Brigade. It was called the Rifle Brigade, the Canadian Rifle Brigade, because at some point it was predicted that there'd be lots of Canadians. And of course there wouldn't be. In fact, all of the soldiers, bar I think one, were Poles. And they were broadly given the task of protecting Scotland against enemy landing. But let's be honest about it. It's like giving a child a colouring book and some crayons and telling them to go and make a nice picture. It's just go and be busy and don't bother us. And they were given whatever resources the British didn't want. Now, soldiers and beautiful Scottish women, if you go up to Leven or Fife, what you see is lots of Polish veterans who speak English with a beautiful Scottish accent. And Scotland has a soft spot for Polish soldiers because a lot of them stayed there. Even after the war, they went back to Scotland and stayed because the Scottish women started teaching them English and just incorporating the soldiers into Scottish society. So the Canadian Rifle Brigade was then the name changed to the 4th Cadre Rifle Brigade because there was no Canadians in it. And Sosabowski was told to find volunteers for country work, which is underground work. And at this point, Fort William becomes important because that is where the silent and unseen, the Cicho Ciemni, were to go to Warsaw. Now, Cicho is what, if a dog's barking, you might say Cicho, means be quiet. So these were the secret soldiers who would parachute in and parachute out before you even knew they had arrived. And then there follows a series of sort of effectively random photographs, but very quickly Sosabowski realized that the shortest way was to be paras. Okay, you drop in on your enemy as a surprise, and they started being engaged with the parachute course at number 1 Parachute Training Centre in Ringway in Manchester. And this is very, very important because here we have Sosabowski saying, okay, we're not going to be just infantry, we're going to be a self-contained parachute brigade with all the skills that entails. And part of this involved the Polish engineer designed parachute tower, which everyone else claims, but I'm going to show you some cold hard evidence that it was Polish ingenuity that helped create the parachute tower. And there were two Polish innovators in parachute technology, Julian Gebolis and Jerzy Gorecki. They were seconded to Parachute Training School 1 in Ringway, and they brought some real innovative doctrines into parachuting. And so gradually, what had seemed to be a rabble of disparate soldiers was gradually being licked into shape. They were given a more defined task to guard the Fife Peninsula, but all the time they were training to parachute, and they took an oath of allegiance. And you can kind of see at this point they look a bit unsure of themselves. Some of the uniforms aren't completely uniform, but they were young boys, and Sosabowski loved his soldiers. He was absolutely a soldier's commander or soldier's colonel, and this was a feature of his career, that he was often disliked by the establishment, but loved by his soldiers. And we'll talk more about that later, because it's really important. And, you know, I'm aware enough to know of the males in my family in general, but the general in particular, that we have rough edges, we are intolerant, and we say it like it is. But the one group of people he loved was his soldiers. Look at that. You can see this is 1942, the first anniversary. So 1 year down the line, and you've got something that resembles a fighting force. And already, unless I'm mistaken, and I'm not mistaken, they're wearing the characteristic Polish parachute helmets, which aren't really helmets at all. They're effectively a layer of padding around the cranium. Now, like I said, the Poles were effectively, they were tolerated by the British military machine. I don't know if they were particularly welcomed. And with that came the sort of low level of resourcing. And so what they had to do was make do with what they had. So Sosabowski commanded the carpenters to make what looked like a child's assault course. And he had the preliminary centre for parachute training. And what that was just some little wooden towers so that the boys could go and learn to become acclimatized to heights. And it was called the Monkey Grove, because often they were swimming like monkeys. And all the time he was trying to instill in them some pride in their unit, but also to underpin the patriotism, because those were some very angry Poles, because the Nazis had gone into their country, desecrated it, they were occupying it, and all they wanted to do was go back and liberate it. But of course, there are many paras amongst you, and you will know that parachuting is just one element of the skill set you require. You have to be able to be a soldier once you've parachuted. So Sosabowski was ingenious at getting lots and lots of training for the paras. So Norwegians provided tuition in how to ski in case they were doing parachuting into Arctic conditions. And the Polish Tatry Mountains, which were quite close to Stanislaw, provided some Polish mountaineering skill from the tutors. And so the paras were learning how to be soldiers, mountaineers, how to live off the land, and how to ski. And slowly but surely, they were becoming literally skilled in all the skills they needed to do their job. There was a survival course at Dunkeld, where you had to effectively, you got thrown in and told to live off the land for a period of time. And the two paras on the right holding the big fish, one of them was killed in Market Garden and one was killed during a training accident. But literally Scotland is actually really ingenious in terms of, you've got mountains, you've got snow, you've got lots and lots of countryside. So it's a really ideal training ground to train soldiers. And then the Monkey Grove was used to get the introductory parachute course. And once they had their parachute tower, they could start really training to be paras. So the parachute tower allowed a safe, oscillation-free, fully deployed parachute jump without having to go, get back in the plane and go back up, which takes, maybe an hour, 2 hours. You can literally get back up in a few minutes and repeat the exercise. And they used that. And you can see some of these pictures. And these pictures, I have to say, by astonishing coincidence, I bumped into the We Have Ways team on Twitter was it Wednesday or Thursday of this week, and I ended up doing their podcast. So this is a new picture that somebody helpfully provided, and many of the audience, I'm sure, I met doing that podcast, which was a delightful evening. So thank you very much for having me. So that's the parachute tower. That's the end result of being on the parachute tower. And that's a very disobedient parachute. But you can see they're going from a ragtag rabble of undertrained soldiers to being something like a parachute brigade. Of the whole lecture, this is one of my favorite pictures. This is Largo House. And what I'm getting all excited about is the look on the faces of those soldiers. Suddenly they've got some sort of esprit de corps, some pride, some hope, if you will, that they can actually not be impotent and powerless to save their beloved motherland from the jackboot of the Nazi oppressor, and they have some hope that they can go back and liberate it. Now, Largo House, I visited it about 8 years ago when I unveiled a memorial in Leven, and it was a lovely mansion house, but disappointingly, it's been allowed to effectively fall apart. And the suggestion was that the new owner wants it to fall apart so they can build a hotel on it. But that's, it's quite a chilling picture, isn't it? It's quite a sad picture. It's beautiful in one way. Nature's reclaiming what it once had, but it's also very sad because Largo House is historically very, very important, but it's a lovely building. I was told that's General Browning, but I'm not so sure. There's too much braid on his hat and the jawline isn't the right thing. And also they're standing too close together because Browning and Sosabowski, at best, they tolerated each other, but that tolerance, or the cordiality went to tolerance and then it went to intolerance. So I'd be surprised. But these are the boys. And so the Poles ended up training non-Polish paras. And these are some free French. And look at that look on the general's face. You can see that's a genuine smile. His eyes are crinkling up because it doesn't matter if they're non-Polish paras. They came for training with the Poles. So as far as he was concerned, they were his boys. And you can see the pride on his face. And I think it's a lovely picture. And he just took such pride in the fact that he turned what was a hopeless situation into a situation with hope. More improvisation, just literally swinging from trees at Largo House. And that there is Corporal Jankowski. And again, look at the little smile on his face, how proud he is to be part of the resurrection of the crushed Polish army. And that's the view from the top of the parachute tower. And I have to say, I wouldn't be that enthusiastic about jumping off. I don't care how safe it is. And again, these are new pictures provided by someone, a generous donator from the We Have Ways podcast. I think they belong to the Imperial War Museum. So I'm reluctantly going to say thank you, Imperial War Museum, for letting us share your photos of my boys that my great-grandfather changed and letting us have history. That's Wing Commander Maurice Newham, so an RAF chap receiving his parachute badge. And again, a new photograph, Flight Lieutenant Kilkenny being congratulated by the General. And notice, if you will, the single decoration that's hanging on his chest, because I had to do some research into this because I didn't realize what it was. Just the single decoration. I'll come back to that in a little while about what it is and why he got it later on in the lecture. Now, once again, the Poles had to innovate and improvise. And on the left-hand side, what you can see there is a mock-up of the Whitley bomber parachute exit. Now, on a Dakota or a Hercules, certainly a Dakota, you exit via the side of the aircraft. You get caught up in a slipstream, and it's all very nice and safe. But the Whitley bomber, let me tell you about Whitley bombers. Whitley bombers are famously slow. So if a German anti-aircraft outfit saw a Whitley bomber come, they could go away, have their dinner, come back, light a cigarette, and still be able to shoot it down because it was so slow. But for paras, what was crucial was you had to jump through the floor, not the side. And quite often you would, if you misjudged it, you'd clip your jaw and lose a few teeth. That was called ringing the bell, and you weren't a true para until you'd rung the bell. But that left-hand picture shows the innovation of the Poles. They just got a carpenter to bang up a few pieces of wood, and suddenly they've got a model for the Whitley bomber. Jabolis and Gorecki, they started looking at new ways of parachuting, and we'll talk more about that in a little while. And by this time, 244 French, Norwegians, and Dutch, and even some British para were also trained. So, you know, the Poles are really spreading the love. Now, the two Polish innovators looked at the two existing doctrines of parachuting, and they wanted to find a better way of landing with more precision by using shroud lines and canopy shape. So the British doctrine was to land and take your luck, and the German method involved a single riser and landing on all fours. But the Polish method was all about individually using the risers in concert to land with your back to the drift. So that was a really innovative way of doing it, and it combined the advantages of the existing doctrines. So they really did bring something to the party. You can see on the left-hand side the emulation for the Whitley bomber. Although they're jumping from a balloon, you can kind of see if you get it wrong, you clip your jaw on the edge and you lose your teeth. So they had the two-part parachute course. Part one is on the ground. Part two, they often use balloons, and a balloon is actually quite a non-threatening way of doing your first or early parachute jumps because there's no slipstream and it's static. And here you can see top right, that's the Whitley bomber, which is surprisingly small. And you can see a parachutist exiting it. The top left, I think that's the back of a Whitley bomber. It looks surprisingly cramped. So unless anyone wants to correct me, I think that's a para sitting right at the back of the Whitley where the fuselage closes and narrows. Once again, look at the decoration. That on the left-hand side is Jerzy Dierda. After the war, he went back to Poland and he was put in prison by the new communist government for, I think, either 8 years or 12 years. But that showed what faced any officer going back to Poland. And had the general gone back, he would have almost without doubt been executed. This is a video. I don't use videos on Zoom presentations because they gobble up bandwidth. And anyway, we've got a lot to get through. But we'll come back to more of this later on. And we'll try and find a way of making the lecture downloadable so you can enjoy the video. But in the video, you saw some of the training methods. And I noticed a very, very interesting thing. Look who's there on the right-hand side. Unless I'm very much mistaken, that there is the general, which again underscores the fact he never asked his soldiers to do anything that he couldn't or wouldn't do. So I'm 90% sure that's him. He's got the frown, he's got the moustache, he's got the silver sides of his hair. So my money's on that being the general. Prove me wrong. King Craig, so we're now getting ready. The coastal battery, General Sikorsky attended, and this is now maneuvers and exercises. And you can see General Sikorsky bottom right-hand side and supervising the exercises, taking the salute. And that, I mean, look at the dressing on those lines. Those boys they've been doing their marching drills some considerable time. And at this point, General Sikorsky said, "You will be liberating Warsaw." And that was a promise that would come back to haunt them because they didn't liberate Warsaw. And as Colonel Russell will no doubt underscore later on, one has to wonder whether a single brigade could have liberated Warsaw. But we don't know, and we'll never know because they never got the chance. This is another video which I'm not going to show, but the Gapper on the right-hand side became the symbol of the brigade, the diving eagle, and there's various permutations of it depending on from where you are and from where you will be, and often they will have the number of jumps on your Gapper. That's a nice picture of General Sikorsky. And again, look at the smiley face of General Sosabowski behind him, the very obvious glowing pride of General Sosabowski. On the right-hand side, you can see the gappa with the Home Army symbol within it, within the wreath. And that's important because they were training Home Army soldiers. And this was designed by a Pole called Sergeant Valentinovich. Sosabowski knew that the enemy of the soldier is boredom, and so training is the answer. He kept them busy at all times, and more and more soldiers were joining them via various routes, including Persia, Palestine, and Egypt. And about this time, we had, of course, the Kaizen Forest massacre when 10,000 Polish officers were murdered by the Russians. The brigade is preparing for action, and the soldiers are being divided into the various specialities. So signals, engineers, medics, artilleries. And once again, they've been told they're going to liberate Poland, and that's what they want to do. And as we'll see, they would never have got to Poland. General Anders visiting in 1942. And now you can see they really are preparing for action, and they've got their field artillery, and a little bit later on we'll be seeing the organisational chart of the brigade to see it really is a proper conventional brigade ready for action. This is in Leuven, where I said I visited about 8 years ago. There's a parade with a presentation of colours and exercises with the 1st Airborne in 1943. General Browning, Frederick Browning, presented the brigade with some new colours. He will be a feature of the lecture as we go on, because whilst he was responsible for providing the resource that they had, he would bump heads with General Sosabowski in a very big way later on, and was instrumental in his dismissal and effectively near disgrace that my great-grandfather experienced after Operation Market Garden. More of the same, and you can kind of see already there's a bit of tension between the two generals, and that picture does speak 1,000 words. You can see the barely disguised contempt bordering on hostility from General Brown. This is the uniforms of the brigade personnel. When they're training, they've got their training helmets, battles, and then the officers had a slightly different, had a dress uniform and their fatigues or their battle uniform. By 1944, it's the thick end of 2,000 soldiers, and they're divided into signals, engineers, medical, and supply corps. And there's some interesting novelties we need to talk about. Richard Tice was an American soldier, or an American conscript, a recruit, if you will. He just liked the whole idea of the brigade, and therefore he said, I want to be part of this. And that's exactly what happened. He joined, and he was called the Cowboy, and he received a commission to, I think, second lieutenant. And there's some discussion about which of those pictures. The left-hand one definitely is him. I think the right-hand one we thought was him, but perhaps it probably isn't. There were some visitors to the brigade. There was Attlee and Montgomery, and of course Browning from time to time. And there's a nice picture of Monty. And we'll see later on that recently unearthed ciphers from Montgomery showed that he said some unfair and unkind things about the Poles after Operation Market Garden. In 1943, General Sikorsky was killed, and the brigade went on parade at his funeral. And in 1943, General Sosabowski was decorated with the Gold Cross of Merit with Swords. And last time I gave this lecture, I noticed this, which is the Virtuti Militari. And you can probably see my grandfather's Virtuti Militari. We probably can't see it because the computer's on my page. The Virtuti Militari of Major Sosabowski, which is right there. And he clearly had this before 1943. So I had to ask one of my friends, Darek Krakowiak, tell me what happened. And this is all to do with the invasion of Warsaw. And it's an interesting story. There was massive fighting in Warsaw by the 21st Infantry, the Children of Warsaw, commanded by General Stanislaw, and bloody fighting in Groszów. And they were fighting a stronger opponent, but they inflicted severe losses. And so what happened was, just before Warsaw capitulated, General Rommel, not that Rommel, the other Rommel, awarded the regiment and its commander the Silver Cross of the Order of Virtuti Militari. And that answered a mystery to me, which I should have noticed before. So now we know how that came to be. So 1943, full battle order. They're equipped with well-bike motor scooters, which are useful as paras, because if you drop outside your DZ, you can then sort of get on your scooter and go elsewhere. So off they go. They remind me a little bit of those little scooters that you see, these slightly feral youths in the town centres riding on. But they're equipped, they're ready to go into Warsaw, although again, Colonel Russell will discuss this during the Q&As. Colonel Sosabowski is promoted to general, and the brigade is presented with a new standard, which was made by the women of Warsaw from the robes of Cardinal Dunajewski and smuggled into Great Britain by three Cichociemni, silent and unseen. They brought the colour to the brigade. And again, all this underpins the patriotism and the loyalty of the brigade, and their desperate wish to go and liberate Warsaw. That's President in exile Raszkiewicz inspecting in Kupar a parade, and just general pictures of the brigade just before they were redeployed to Stamford in Peterborough. That's quite a sweet, evocative picture of the general and the chaps having just caught the train. And this here, you can perhaps examine it a little bit later on. It shows the organisational table for the brigade, which shows that it really is specialised as much as any brigade ought to be. They were subordinated to the 1st Airborne, went to Peterborough in preparation for some as yet undefined activities in the war. There was the Tinwell tragedy, where there was a loss of life through 2 Dakotas crashing. And then the brigade drops into drill on day 5 of Operation Market Garden. We'll continue with the story of the brigade, because we're going to go back to Operation Market Garden as more or less the main event. But after Market Garden, the brigade was subordinated to the British Army of the Rhine, and they had their last parade in 1947, where it was disbanded, but clearly not forgotten. So that takes us to a point, and I just put that beautiful mural. I gave this lecture for the Northern Ireland group, and this is a beautiful mural which I'm desperate to see. Maciej, hopefully he's watching, will tell us more about that another time. So that's the end of part 1. We've just sort of summarised how the brigade came to be, and now we get on to the main event, which is a little bit of more widespread military history, which is Operation Market Garden. And hopefully this is a factual and precise discussion about what happened and why it happened. But first of all, some trivia, if I may. This is the screen splash for the film. And as you can see, it was a very expensive film because of the faces. So first of all, Gene Hackman was General Sosabowski. But also, I love Hardy Kruger. Hardy Kruger is such an innovative and versatile actor, but he always seems to play the hot-headed SS trooper intent on blowing up bridges and so forth. And he is actually an amalgamation of 3 characters, Heinz Harmel, Walter Haase, and Kurt Student. So he is the hot-headed SS officer, and Maximilian Schell he often plays the slightly calmer, weary commanding officer trying to rein in Hardy Kruger. So that he played General Beatrick. More about him a little bit later on. And I just want to point out that they really did nail General Sosabowski's character with Gene Hackman. And I put it to you that they even look very similar. Look at the droopy hang-on eyes, the kind of the mouth and the moustache, and particularly the way that uncharacteristically the beret of the general is pulled back. It's not to one side. He adopts the Polish method of pulling it back, and they nailed it completely. And what they did was they sent researchers to speak to the son of the general and said, tell us about his mannerisms, tell us about his character. And so all you saw from Gene Hackman was a lovely facsimile of the general, intolerant, sometimes overly direct and mercurial. So more about that a little bit later on, because I think there were some inaccuracies in the film, some of which were due to poetic license. And if you have got the DVD, and if you haven't, you should have, get the DVD and go to the special features, because there's a thing called the trivia track. And what happens is when you see a certain track, a little balloon will pop up, which will give you some facts about whatever inaccuracies there were, or some further facts about the particular scene in the movie. And a lot of the research that I did, I just watched this because it's a distillation of Cornelius Ryan's book. I also want to bring to this, I'm sure you're thinking I've mixed up two of my PowerPoints, but I haven't. This, of course, is James Cameron's Aliens, and you have to be a certain age to appreciate it. What on earth could this have to do with Operation Market Garden? Well, I'll tell you what. These are the names of the colonial Marines. And it turns out that 3 of them are named after players, not players, but soldiers or officers who were at Operation Market Garden. In hindsight, Frost and Hicks are obvious, but what's the other one? The other one is Wierzbowski, right at the bottom. Edmund Wierzbowski was the CO of the 2nd Platoon, Company H of the 101st. Now, I'm really, really happy that they've got a nice Polish name, but if they wanted a Boski, I can think of a better one. But anyway, that's just me. So that's a nice bit of Market Garden Aliens trivia. Let's talk about where we were and the preamble. So we're going to go to 1944. Paris had been liberated in August. The German 7th Army was retreating, and they were retreating faster than the Allies could advance. 25 out of 38 divisions had been smashed up. And these numbers are just amazing. 200,000 soldiers missing, killed, or wounded. Another 200,000 as prisoners of war. Brussels were liberated on the 3rd of September. The Allies reached Antwerp on the 4th. And Dolly Dinsdag, Mad Tuesday, was on the 5th of September. And everyone was thinking this is now a walkover. But of course, a fast retreating army creates its own problems because there became supply issues. And in particular, the Allies failed to make use of Antwerp as a port because they didn't capture the Schelde, which is the waterway above it, which meant they had a perfectly usable port, but no way of getting to it. The Allies paused to try and address the supply issue, and that gave Germans the time to group. And in particular, many Germans disregarded their instructions to retreat, one of whom was Kurt Schill, who disregarded orders to return with his decimated 86th Division and stuck his feet into the ground and said, we are going to do something about this. And so the Allied commanders were 2, Patton or Montgomery, and Eisenhower could resource either one or the other to get to Berlin. And they had 2 different strategies for achieving what they wanted to do. Montgomery wanted a single big thrust towards Berlin, and he advocated Operation Comet, which was the predecessor to Operation Market Garden, whereas Eisenhower wanted a broader approach. And historians now say, you know what? Actually, you could have used the Canadians to much better effect, but it was between Eisenhower and Montgomery. Crucially, he resourced Montgomery, but the Germans thought he would resource Eisenhower. So pattern. And therefore, what happened was the Germans thought it would be one thing and it turned into another thing. And by stunning irony, the SS, the 9th and the 10th SS, were sent to Arnhem to rest and refit. They were then, purely by chance, because the Germans didn't think that Patton would be resourced. They thought they didn't think that Montgomery would be resourced. They thought that Patton would. These are the German key commanders. Model was sent in as a replacement to von Krüger. After only 18 days, Model was replaced by von Rundstedt. These were soldiers, career soldiers. And I don't want to upset anyone by saying anything remotely nice about German soldiers, but I think we need to differentiate between the murderous SS and so forth and some of the Wehrmacht who had some kind of military code about them. And in particular, von Rundstedt had been removed from post by saying to Hitler's chief of staff, Keitel, end the war, what can you do? And we'll see later on, we'll talk more about this code a little bit later on. So this is the organizational chart. So von Rundstedt in charge, then Model in charge of Dietrich and Student. And what we'll see that the 9th and the 10th Panzer Divisions with the SS Panzer Corps were sent to Arnhem to rest. By stunning irony, the one place that the Allies didn't want them to be was anywhere near Arnhem. So this was the situation. The Germans retreated back to Arnhem, and von Rundstedt was ordered to maintain the Siegfried Line and the retreat of von Zangen's 15th Army. And it was believed by von Rundstedt, and he was the ultimate opinion former, that Patton would be backed and not Montgomery. And so, by a twist of chance, sent the 9th and the 10th, the von Rundstedt and the Hohenstaufen, to Arnhem to rest and refit. So they just went there just to sit around and fix their tanks and resupply, awaiting further orders. The British failed to stop the retreat of von Zangen's with the 15th Army. And that was crucial because it allowed them to cross the Schelde and retreat back to behind their own lines, but it allowed effectively 60,000 more troops at von Rundstedt's disposal. So already we're kind of seeing some sort of strategic errors which allowed the Germans to regroup. The British secured Antwerp with the sluice gates intact, so they had a perfectly usable port, but the Schelde, which is the waterway leading to it, wasn't secured, and therefore they had no way of using that port. And we'll see later on that provisioning and supplies and logistics was going to become a big problem for Operation Market Garden. So this was the plan. It was the successor to Operation Comet. The plan was to parachute a carpet of 35,000 men to capture 7 strategic bridges all at once and hold them with lightly armed paras, allowing 30 corps under Horrocks and Joe Vandeleurs Irish Guards to drive up and then get on across the Arnhem Bridge and then drive down to the industrial heart of the Ruhr. And once that was captured, effectively the war would be ended by Christmas. That was the plan, and it was conceived at 7 days' notice. So the airborne operation was Operation Market, and the ground operation was called Garden. And these were the actors. So the airborne corps was to clear the way for 30 corps. The Spooning 101st were given a certain number of strategic bridges to capture. The 82nd, which of course is what we're here today to discuss largely and has a place of honour in today's lecture, they had to get the Waal at Nijmegen and the Maas at Graaf, and finally 30 Corps was to drive up the road, crucially called Hell's Highway for good reason, and to press forward to the Ruhr. 3 drops of paras a combination of paras and gliders. They would hold the bridges till 30 Corps arrived, and you can already see what's going to happen. If one bridge is failed to be captured, then the whole operation fails, and you've got to drive 60 miles to Arnhem over 2 days, which sounds kind of achievable, but for reasons we're about to see, became unachievable. And we'll be using the same map that you can see here to see how far 30 Corps fell behind. Each group of paras would send 30 Corps from one group to the next, the 101st to the 82nd, the 82nd to the British and the Poles at Arnhem. Failure of one meant failure of all and eventual failure of the mission. Once they'd done that, the British would secure Arnhem Bridge, now called John Frost Bridge, allowing 30 Corps to travel down it. And I now point out that the road was called Hell's Highway because it had one lane. And you can already see one lane. What happens if a tank is destroyed? You have to have tank moving equipment. One lane is a disaster. And of course, especially that the Germans, once they worked out what was going on, would know this and try and cut the corridor. So that sets the scene. And these are the actors of the Allies: Brereton, Browning, Roy Urquhart, General Gavin, General Maxwell Taylor, and of course, General Sosabowski. That's the kind of organizational chart of the first of Roy Urquhart's contingent: Lathbury, Hackett, Hicks, and Sosabowski, and they all came under the command of Browning. Right, so the plan, let's summarize the plan. It's devised at a week's notice: 2,500 gliders, 35,000 men, 2/3 paras, 1/3 gliders, and the lightly armed paras with, I think, 100 rounds of ammunition each, would have to hold the bridges for 2 days until the arrival of 30 Corps. The flaws are as follows, and of course, hindsight is beautiful. The perception was that it's old men and bicycles because the Germans were just recruiting personnel and scraping the bottom of the military barrel. And at this point, it's essential to point out that Dutch intelligence had reported the presence of panzers in Arnhem. Now, if you remember A Bridge Too Far, there's a young chap called Major Fuller. His name wasn't Fuller. His name was Brian Urquhart, but in the film, they changed his name to avoid any confusion with Roy Urquhart. And he was conscientious. He said, we've had these reports. He ordered some reconnaissance, and there were pictures of tanks. But by this time, there was so much momentum captured by Market Garden and Janice's groupthink, a phenomenon where everyone has to agree. And if you don't agree, you're against the project. That started setting in, and Brian Urquhart was placed on sick leave because he pushed a little bit too hard. He said, I want to come to the party, but he wasn't allowed to. I think he died about 2 years ago, and he was a real friend to the Poles, and he had been unfairly maligned as a naysayer, when in fact what he was doing was what he was supposed to do. And how many lives would have been saved had he been listened to? Montgomery and Browning ridiculed these, and we'll come back to that a little bit later on. So these are the preparations, and I know you can imagine that scene in A Bridge Too Far where Jeremy Kemp is explaining where the drop zone is to the Allied commanders, and Sean Connery says, presumably you'd like to drop somewhere, and they said, it's just over here. And he says, that must be 10 miles. And Jeremy Kemp says, oh, just over 8 actually. 8 miles. And that's the point. A parachute operation is supposed to have an element of surprise. And of course, it's hardly a surprise if they parachute 8 miles away and start making their way. In fact, the drop zone was so far from the bridge that the Germans at first thought that it wasn't the bridge they were after, it was Field Marshal Model. Model thought he was the target because they were parachuting so far from the bridge. Straight away, they had some jeeps that Urquhart was going to use to address this problem, and the point was there was no margin for error whatsoever. literally, if they lost a single plane, allegedly, that would be a major, major problem. And some of the equipment, especially the radios, was untested. What of the Germans, General Browning? Yes, what of the Germans? The Germans were all over Arnhem. The 10th Frundsberg under Hamel, the 9th Hohenstaufen under Haase, Kraft's SS Battalion at Wolfes, and the SS Grenadiers, and of course Beatrix Panzer Division were based northeast. Can you imagine a less desirable, unforeseen, or it wasn't unforeseen, change to the plan? Lightly armed paras against well-trained and very, very angry panzer troops, because of course they've been sent there to have a rest, not to have a fight. And so the operation, most of the landings were successful. And some of the Operation Market Garden plans did fall into Modal's hands, but they said this is so outlandish, it can't possibly be true. But Urquhart's troops, they were quickly hemmed in. They landed on top of a lunatic assignment and started radioing back, but very quickly found out that the radios just didn't work. And Modal assumed he was the subject of the attack because he was so far from the bridges. And Beatrix is like literally a bear with a broken bottle up its butt. He was right straight away. He sent the 10th Panzers to Nijmegen and the 9th to the bridge at Arnhem. So he sort of worked out that the bridges were strategically essential either way, even if he hadn't worked out what the actual plan was. And John Frost's group landed on the north end of the bridge, and they immediately ran into tanks. And that was, yeah, they were, to say the least, slightly perplexed. And so the local radios, they weren't working because they weren't calibrated properly, and they were broadcasting on a frequency to whom no one was listening. And there wasn't any communication with anyone outside Arnhem. And what that meant was that the RAF were dropping supplies onto drop zones, which they were overrun. So literally they were delivering chocolate and soda to the Germans. And the 1st Airborne had run into the 10th SS Panzers at Nijmegen. The Somme Bridge, which was to be captured by the 101st, was destroyed. So they had to replace it with Bailey bridges. And I think you can remember that classic scene in A Bridge Too Far with Elliot Gould stuffing the big cigar into his mouth saying, "Oh shit," when it was blown up. 30 Corps started moving, but very quickly fell behind because of tanks that were breaking down. And this cartoon shows the actual version of the plan. So already on the 17th of September, the 30 Corps, the armour, is falling behind. Frost's men were repelled. They were surrounded. They started getting low on ammunition very, very quickly. And as we said, they only had 150 rounds of ammunition. So, and they weren't getting any resupply. And the first 10 Polish gliders landed. But one of the problems for the Poles was they would be dropped south of the river and the supplies would be dropped north of the river. Nijmegen Bridge was uncaptured. And about 10% of the predicted supplies were actually being recovered by the Allies. The rest of it were falling into the Germans, much to their delight. 30 Corps had to wait while the Bailey bridges were replacing the Somme Bridge, and very quickly they fell 24 hours behind schedule. Now, a passing nod, if I may, to Julian Cook's battalion, the 504th, who heroically crossed the river. The idea was that Joe Vandeleur's Irish Guards were going to put purple smoke and conceal the crossing, but the smoke blew away. And I think it was Robert Redford, wasn't it? Robert Redford was playing Julian Cook. Incidentally, that cost about $500,000 extra because they had to pay Robert Redford overtime so the budget was exceeded. But the reality was that of the 26 boats that started, 11 arrived, and eventually Typhoon fighters gave some cover. They suffered huge losses, but as soon as they managed to cross, the Germans capitulated, which tells you all you need to know about the 504th and also all you need to know about the German troops on the other side. By the 18th, this is the cartoon which tells us the relative actual versus planned. They're well behind schedule, and this is becoming more and more of a problem. On the 19th, 30 Corps reached Nijmegen Bridge. This is another video clip we're not going to look at on this occasion, but I ideally hope that we'll have this lecture live, and I'm going to twist Ben's arm to make sure we have the tour of the United States so that we can do the lecture and give it its give it its full attention. Now, Harmel, and this was Hardy Kruger, said, "I want to blow the bridge up." And Beatrix says, "Why do all my generals want to blow up all my bridges?" But Harmel actually ignored his orders, and he planted explosives on the Nijmegen Bridge, and he tried to detonate them. There's some anecdotal evidence that the Dutch underground had disabled the explosive. Jan van Hoof had disabled them. We'll never really know. But again, you can remember the classic scene as the tanks crossed the Nijmegen Bridge, where Hardy Kruger says, "Who can stop them now?" And Maximilian Schell, who played Beatrix, says, "Niemand, no one." And yet, 1 mile from Arnhem, stopped they would be. That's the bridge at Nijmegen. By 20th, 30 Corps had actually made some ground up, but they should have been north of Arnhem by this point in the game. And these are just some random pictures of parts of the city, parts of the town, the church at Oosterbeek, and this is Urquhart's HQ. And when I saw this picture, I remembered a delightful friend called Bert Alfman when we went to, when I was doing, I was doing my Dutch lecture tour. So Bert, if you're here, mate, what a lovely pleasure it was to talk to you earlier today. This is Urquhart's house. There's a scene in A Bridge Too Far where Roy Urquhart is stuck in a house hemmed in by a tank, which he then broke out of. And this shows you the Oosterbeek perimeter where Urquhart was there. You can see the Hartenstein right in the middle there. And effectively, it's a thumb shape with craft and all the Germans literally hemming in Roy Urquhart's airborne and trying to sort of effectively push them back into the river. So literally they're being pushed further and further back and pressurized all along the way. Cape to Horst House is the house where the injured went. And again, that sort of features highly in A Bridge Too Far. At some point, Beatrix asked for a ceasefire with a white flag and offered a surrender to the British. In the film, again, it's a slight inaccuracy. It was his adjutant who went across and said, my general says, "Can we discuss a surrender?" And Johnny Frost's adjutant says, "I'm sorry, we haven't got the capacity to take you all prisoner." It wasn't a German that went back, it was a captured Brit, a captured Para, and he just didn't go back with the message. He said, Johnny Frost said, "Don't bother going back, they'll get the message sooner or later." And so with supplies falling into German hands, they were short of food, medicine, and ammunition, and it started to become slightly untenable. And they really had no way out of it. The Germans, realizing by now what was happening and what the end game was supposed to be, were trying to cut the Allies off from the riverbank. And at some point, the corridor was cut. And that being the case, the game was almost over, and a temporary ceasefire was arranged by Beatrix. And again, I don't want to keep referring to A Bridge Too Far as our seminal academic work, but there's the doctor goes under a white flag and talks to, I think it was Harmel, but it was paid by Hardy Kruger. And Hardy Kruger says, there's a battle and we're in the process of winning it. We're not having a ceasefire. And then Dietrich calls him and says, General Ludwig, which is Hardy Kruger's name in the film. And he says, no, there's going to be a ceasefire. Let them collect their wounded. And again, please don't misunderstand me, because he was an SS officer, and one might expect no mercy from the SS. And yet there were minor kindnesses. And ironically, he gave the doctor a bottle of brandy to take back to John Frost. So I don't understand. 1 minute you're trying to kill each other, the next minute you're some war and sending him a bottle of brandy to have later on. And 1 mile from Arnhem, it all stopped. And of the 10,000, about 2,000 got to where they were supposed to be. And what was supposed to be Monty's genius plan was an abject failure. So we can have a big discussion afterwards about why it failed, because I'm sure there'll be many opinions. And if you want to get a load of military historians to disagree, ask them to pick out the one reason that Market Garden failed. But these are some things to choose from. Untested radios, the element of surprise that was lost, the poles being dropped south of the bridge, their equipment being dropped north, the drop zones remote from their targets, the fog, the weather, as my great-grandfather said, the intelligence failure to place. They didn't fail to place it. They were told. It couldn't have been clearer, but they chose not to take into account the fact that the 2nd SS Panzer Corps was in Arnhem, the narrow corridor, the tiny operational margin, the fact that if one bridge was failed, all were failed, the perception of a walkover, Hitler Youth and old men on bicycles, which brings us to the end of part 2. So we're halfway there, and we are, unlike 30 Corps, are on schedule, because now I want to talk about what the Poles did, and then we get to the bit that matters to me most, which is talking about the man behind the Gapper, the general, and his son, the major. This is just random photographs, and I will try and provide as much commentary as I possibly can, because some of these photographs just don't have any provenance. But the equipment was dropped in 10 gliders north on the 18th on day 5. The delay was caused by fog. I think they were due in on day 3, but the main contingent took off on day 5. That's pictures pre-battle of the Poles with their Dakota. And that picture is of General Stanislaw with his chief of staff. So I'm 3 years older than the general was then, with Richard Malashkiewicz before going off to Holland. Again, random pictures of preparations as they took off. Now, someone put it to me that that's the general. It might be, it might not be. Did he or didn't he say, God bless Field Marshal Montgomery? I don't know. I'd like to think he did. And I'm going to be misquoting him a lot later on. So let's just take the kind view and let's assume that he was. I'd really like to think that he said that as he jumped out. Now, where did the Poles go and where should they have gone? Now, effectively, they were supposed to parachute with their kit south of the river. There's supposed to be a ferry to take them north of the river, and they landed in the fields outside a little village called Driel, which is a municipality of Arnhem. And the reality was they landed without their kit, and this is the drop zone. And the interesting thing about this is what you can see above it is the Westerboing Heights. Now, this camera, this picture was taken by a lovely Dutch chap, and the thing about cameras is they foreshorten and they turn the aspects all wrong. So, oh, sorry, I'm so sorry. So the Westerboing Heights are actually much higher than it looks, and the Germans had them. And so it gave, of course, a beautiful line of fire onto a very, very exposed drop zone. And you can see it there as well. And that is the view from the Westerboing Heights onto the field, which was the drop zone. just more of the same, and that's the church drill. And so it was literally a turkey shoot, shooting fish in a barrel, if you will, but the Poles jumped nevertheless. And don't forget, they had been told they would be liberating Warsaw. So 1,000 of the Poles jumped south of the river, 500 were fog-bound, turned back to the UK. One of the drop zones was unusable, and they had to cross the Rhine onto the north side. And they were told there would be a ferry, and there just wasn't. Now, I like A Bridge Too Far, and I watch it every 6 months or so, and I watched it always before this lecture. May I introduce to you Captain Ludwik Zwolanski? And you won't have heard of him, and yet you should have heard of him, because he was the liaison between Roy Urquhart and Sosabowski. And in fact, it was he that swung the Rhine, not the la-di-da Cockney Sparrow British chap that was portrayed in the film. It was Captain Zwolanski, and he swam the Rhine to bring orders from Urquhart to Sosabowski, and Sosabowski said, well, you'll just have to jolly well swim back now. Sorry, mate. With my response to the orders, and don't forget, this is September, this is autumn in Northern Europe, so it would be cold, dark, and dirty, and yet he, it's one of the many examples of the heroism that was demonstrated by everyone, but by the Poles, because this lecture is about Polish patriotism. So they had to cross in rubber boats, and as you saw in the film, there was a trail line across the river, and it kind of worked as long as it worked until one of the Germans sent up a very light, a flare, and suddenly they came under withering fire from across in the Westerboing Heights, and 56 reached on the first crossing, and 250 reached the North Bank on the second crossing, suffering losses. And then once the Polish radios worked, they were the only signals between Urquhart and eventually 30 Corps and the Polish Parachute Brigade. So I suppose one of the outcomes was, if you want something done, ask the Poles. There'll be a lot of that from this point on in the lecture, I have to say. There's miscellaneous pictures in drill, the Poles, the Germans, the lovely straight Dutch roads, some of the field artillery, a drill with an REME officer, and to my shame, I've forgotten what that acronym means. It was there, and it was going to roll off my tongue. But for the time being, REME, we have ways of making you talk. Either text me or stick it on the Twitter what REME stands for. Foxholes, and these are just random pictures taken at the time by whoever was taking them. That's the Hartenstein, presumably from the back. It looks like it from the back. That's the old Catholic boys' school. And again, the battlefield of Oosterbeek, it looks nothing like that now. Lovely straight Dutch roads. It's just the brigade doing what the brigade said it would do, except it's doing it in Holland and not in Poland. That's a piece of armor that's been, or a jeep, that's a Polish jeep that's been overturned. Battlefield communications by the Poles, and just time for a quick cigarette before the next phase as we come along. And that's the general talking to his soldiers. That there is the Walberg Conference, and don't get me started about the Walberg Conference, because you had Browning resplendent in his dress uniform. You had Horrocks, I think, and the other commanders, and you had Sosabowski in his dirty uniform, and don't forget, he couldn't speak English particularly well. Everything was translated, which made him very much the outsider, and he was a soldier's soldier. He wasn't a Sandhurst type, and he was required to be subordinated to the Dorsets. That's Colonel Stevens, his liaison officer, and he was saying, "This isn't going to fly now. We need to cut our losses." And he was subordinated to the Dorsets. And with stunning irony, bearing in mind they were accused of not fighting properly and cowardice by Montgomery, they were commanded to protect the British withdrawal, Urquhart's withdrawal. More of the same. These are the 500 Poles, or the graves of some of the 500 Poles that were lost. Their graves are still in the Arnhem the cemetery at Oosterbeek, and the brigade returned to England, and there was a commemoration ceremony. That's the Polish HQ. The house still stands at Molenstraat, and there's a funny story about Sosab. There was a half track giving the Poles some trouble, and they needed a tank to lead them. So Sosab got a lady's bicycle, and I just think it's a funny picture of a one-star general leading a tank on a bicycle. That's a really haunting picture for me. I don't know why. That was the padre of the brigade. I think it's a really haunting picture with his deep eyes. That's Humbert Misuda. His body was actually discovered only about 20 years ago, funny enough. And this is the cemetery. And part of where we go from here in the story concerns the cemetery, because there was a young Dutch journalist called Gertjan Lasje, and Gertjan was present at one of the commemorations when someone said, "What are those graves over there?" And someone said, "It's just a few Poles." And that's really important. Just a few Poles. And he thought, well, what's this got to do with it? And to cut a long story short, he started working, and eventually Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands heard about this, and he said, this has all been wrong. The Poles, they were treated so poorly at Market Garden, and that started a story which we're going to find out about a little bit later on. These are some Polish graves. Yes. So the brigade returned to England, and this is when the sad bit of the story starts before the happy bit restarts. The brigade went off to Germany, and that's the end of part 3, but part 3 links into part 4 about what happened to the general. So this is now the bit that's really important to me, and being as the host has disappeared from my screen, I'm really hoping you're all still, oh, there you are, Ben. Have I disappeared from the screen? Anyway, maybe can someone on Twitter say if you can still hear me, because I can only see Ben, I can't see me anymore. And whilst I'm not the star of the show, yes, part 3. Let's talk about the man behind the major. And I'm just going to text someone that, am I still on? I want to have a quick discussion about Major General Stanislaw Sosabowski. First of all, what happened to him at after Market Garden is he had said, this isn't going to work, but we're going to do it anyway because I'm a soldier and I obey orders. And this is the first of the poison pen letters. This is from Frederick Browning. He talked about Sosabowski being difficult to work with, obstinate, inflexible. He wants everything done for him. And that's bad enough. But later on, Montgomery will write a cipher which said the Poles were cowards. Unforgivable. And so President Rashkiewicz, under pressure from the British government, wrote to Sosabowski and said, you're being redeployed and you are now inspector of salvage and disposal. And to a proud old man like that, that was completely unsuitable. And what he did was, he said, I have to go then, which is, of course, what they wanted. And so he told the brigade, and the boys went on hunger strike and said, we're not going to eat until this is changed. And he said, boys, let's just have dinner together. And yes, we'll part nicely, but I'm not going to kiss the colour. Kissing the colour is what a commanding officer does when he's leaving. But he said, I'm not going to do that because I'm not leaving. I'll always be here. And so his affectionate autobiography, born on the 6th of May, went into the Austrian army because of the Polish-Austrian overlap, was in charge of the children of Warsaw, he was taken prisoner, went to France, and crossed back into Britain. He was the commander-in-chief of the 21st Infantry Regiment. He was then the deputy GOC of the 4th Rifle Division. He was the commander of the Canadian Rifle Brigade. And as we now know, he started, conceived, and built and grew the 1st Polish Independent Parachute Brigade. He was demobilized in 1947, and that's when it gets a bit sad. And we'll come on to the sad bit later on. We've seen these photographs before. And this is just General Sosabowski pictures before we get onto what actually happened. Look at the picture on the left. That's really important for reasons that will become apparent. He was indeed a soldier. He was not a businessman. And as we'll see a little bit later on, he started 2 businesses which failed because he left the army with about £300. And I suppose in those days, £300 was a lot more than it is now, but it doesn't sound very much for a lifetime of military service. And this is him towards civilian life, him walking in the Alps. And you can see he's gone from being a middle-aged man to being kind of a young old man, if you see what I mean. I think what happened to him aged him visibly. And although he took great joy in life, he couldn't go back to Poland because he would have been executed, and he wasn't given a pension, and he had to make do with what he had. And so he started a business which failed. He started another one which failed, and what he ended up doing was he worked as a storeman in a factory in Harlesden or Acton. And the funny bit is that a lot of the operatives were his soldiers. And so when he drove by on a forklift truck or they went to the stores to get something, they would snap to attention, not unlike General Maczek, who led the tank brigade. He ended up as a waiter in Scotland, and diners would come in, sit down, look at the menu, he would walk over, and they'd of course snap to attention because they were his soldiers. I don't know about you. Someone's got to be a waiter. Someone's got to be a storeman. But really, a 1-star general, to what? To prove a point. That was shocking. And what was also shocking was the Poles were blamed for the failure of Operation Market Garden. And that's not me being a great-grandson. I will show you the cipher later on. All right? Cold, hard evidence that it was easy to park it with the Poles. He didn't get bitter about it. He didn't get his boxes into a scrunch. He wrote The Shortest Way and The Way Wound by Desolation. He started writing his books. He retired at age 75 and he died in Hillingdon Hospital. And do you know what he died of? Being obstinate, because he wouldn't take his nitroglycerin tablets for his heart condition. Now, there's a lot of discussion about this because it was put to me that his ashes were not taken back to Poland. But I will show you pictures of what looks like a Polish military funeral. And my suggestion is that he was buried in Poland at the Pulaski Military Cemetery, but dead men can't talk, and so he was tolerated. But I'll happily be corrected about this. Maybe his ashes went later on, and I need to look it up. So he was the storekeeper during the week, but at weekends he went back to his Polish, in quotes, family, and he'd give lectures and seminars about what he did. And these are pictures of him, and you can see he's aged visibly. He's absolutely aged. He was a middle-aged guy, but he looks years older than his age, because I think he was quite, traumatized, if you will, by what happened. But nevertheless, he was delighted to be who he was, and you can sort of see the cars, the 1960s cars, and the delight on his face at being General Sosabowski. And when surrounded by his boys, he was never happier. This is a video clip, and I mention this because at the end of the video clip, is this man. And this is the bit where we depart from the general and the brigade and start talking about the son of the general. This, ladies and gentlemen, is Dr. Major Stanislaw Sosabowski, hero of the Warsaw Uprising. And if you think his face looks a bit strange, it does, because he was shot in the face. He lost his one remaining eye on the Warsaw Uprising, and he lost his first eye when he was 19 to cancer. And that's what he looked like before. As you can see on the right-hand side, he was a military doctor. He's a qualified doctor, but a military doctor. And he was, oh, he's a handsome guy, look. And that's the military doctor's school. And you can see him third row back, third from the right. That's him there. And he was delighted to be what he could be. That's him on the right-hand side at the Army Medical Academy. And I think by that point, that's 1935, so I suspect he's got both his eyes, but at some point, he lost one of his eyes to cancer. He was the commander of Units Collegium A of the Warsaw Underground. And if you notice my tie, it's the Warsaw Underground tie, the AK, and his duty was to fight the Dirty War. The Dirty War was the one where the Geneva Convention doesn't apply. So they were tasked with executing Germans in general, but high-ranking German officers in particular, and destroying resources where possible. On the August the 4th, he was shot by a sniper in the face and blinded. When I was older and I used to go and see him, he started confiding in me. And one of the things he said to me was, "Prof," even though I wasn't a prof then, he said, "Prof, I was so lucky. It was an explosive bullet, not an armor-piercing bullet." For the love of God, who in hell gets shot in the face and then says how lucky they are? I'll tell you who. Dr. Major Stanislaw Sosabowski. That was his outlook. I'm lucky to be alive. He broke his neck when he was a boy by jumping into a river with a rock in it that he didn't see. He had cancer when he was 19. He was shot in the Warsaw Uprising. So he said, I haven't got time for death. Death will have to wait for me. And I'm lucky to be alive, so I'm not frightened of dying. His wife came and evacuated him from the hospital because the SS did what they did in Warsaw. They started executing patients, but his wife, Christina, she dressed him as a doctor, but carried him out of the hospital and through the sewers, and he was then smuggled back to England. The 5,000 of the AK, 5 days before Operation Tempest, they radioed London, we're ready to rise up, send the brigade. The brigade's involvement will have titanic significance, but no one answered. And this is one of the heartbreaking things, both for the AK and also for the brigade. And yes, we will discuss the likelihood of a brigade being able to liberate a city in the Q&A session after the lecture. That's a picture, a rare picture of the brigade. We try to look for Stasinek. I suppose it could be him. It's a bit of a stretch. It probably isn't, but I'd like to think it is him. If you want to read about the AK, Stanislaw Sosabowski's book has the real story by Devil's Luck. This is the story of this is the picture of him when he was reunited with his father. He was sanguine about his injury. He said, "I'm lucky to be alive, so why should I be upset about losing my eye?" And you can see there, the bullet hits him. Sorry, I'm so sorry. The bullet hits him just there. It exploded, shattering his eye, but he looked remarkably unscathed. I think there was some damage to his jaw as well. But he was completely, I never, ever heard him complain about it. In fact, you know what he did? He just compensated with his other senses. He listened to the radio when he was retired ceaselessly, but he didn't retire. He, for reasons that won't interest you, his marriage broke up. He brought his twin sons up. He would take them to school, then walk to the bus stop, catch the bus from Ealing to Hillingdon, which is no simple matter as a blind man. And he worked in Hillingdon Hospital. He did physiotherapy. He was a doctor of physiotherapy. And yeah, there I am with my outfit. Ding dong, girls. Take a ticket. But he was happy with his lot in life. That's him in Chiswick, where lots of Poles lived, with his second wife, Hania, and me. And there he is again. The thing was, he loved his life, and he went routinely to St. Dunstan's, which is the home for blind ex-servicemen, and they did archery, which is an oxymoron, isn't it? Blind archery. But whenever I tried to do archery with him in the garden, he would lick me to death. He would beat me. He could hear the sound the arrow made as it hit the target, thus telling him how close it was. And I can just imagine when they were doing the archery on Saturday afternoons, everyone in Rottingdean, which is where the home was, saying, quick, put the car in the garage because the blind archers are out. That's them in Buckingham Palace. And that's my favorite picture of him. And his face, that encapsulates his character. I need to just tell you about him. He was effectively an immigrant to this country, but he spoke of nothing but his gratitude, in spite of the fact that the institution had treated his father so poorly. He said, I'm lucky to be given a job and employment by this country. And when my granny died, of course, I went to see him, and he was on the phone. He was on the phone to the man, to the state. And I asked him who he'd been talking to. He said, I was talking to the pensions agency. I don't want to claim your granny's pension for one day more than I'm entitled. So the thing on his mind was granny's pension, not the fact she died the day before. He used to give money to local charities on the strict condition it was done anonymously, by way of repaying the debt he felt he owed to British society. And the debt wasn't, it was the other way around. And the debt was this. When I was a young man, I was feckless and not that interested. And when I was maybe then I started getting interested. And when I was in my 40s, I used to go and see him after Granny died. And we used to talk like men. And he started confiding in me. And in particular, he said, I remember one day we had to get a German uniform. So we were driving in Warsaw and we saw a 19-year-old Wehrmacht private. We kidnapped him and I had to execute him. And I remember the look on his face. War isn't just about what happens to you and what you do to others. It's the fact that you have to think about it for the rest of your life. I'm not a soldier, but I can imagine the burden that any soldier who's taken a life or who's had their life threatened by others trying to take their life must feel. George Orwell once wrote, war makes monsters of us all, but it didn't make a monster out of him. He was a gentle, loving man. And I never heard him complain about anything. I never heard him say a bad word about anyone. I have to say he had a mixed view about Germans, but I think we can probably understand that. And when Granny died, of course, all his well-meaning family said, you must go into a home. He said, no, I'm not going to do that. You'll take me out of here with my boots on. I'm staying in my house. And can I share with you, being as this is such a special lecture, I've never said this in a lecture, but one of the many things that I regret, it was clear that he was going to die. He just was old and his body gave up. And we were told he had maybe 2 or 3 days to live. So I went to say goodbye to him. And I lived in Reigate, and that's maybe 100 miles from the hospital. you know what I did? I had a 9 o'clock lecture. So I thought, I'll just go and do the lecture, then I'll go and see him. I gave the lecture and I went there. And by the time I got there, I was 1 hour late. He died. And if I could change one thing, that would be it. That's my thinking. And so now when my students say, my granny's ill, or what shall I do? I say, don't waste a second. Exam, you can sit any time. Time with your grandparents, you can never get back. So, yeah, to my shame. And that was him. He used to sit outside his house, look at the neat outfit with his cravat. With his cravat. And he used to sit outside his house. And what would happen is someone would bring his lunch every day. He just lived his life. He was just happy. And he never really went out. He listened to the radio. He had his cat. And like I say, I never heard him say a bad thing about anyone. He died in 2000, 83 years old. And for him, he would have been delighted, cocking a snook at the Grim Reaper. His ashes were taken back to Poland, where he was given a full military funeral and guard of honor, and quite rightly so. He was awarded the Virtuti Militari. You can see behind me, I hope, his medals. I managed to strong arm my father into giving them to me. I took them to Spink and Sons to be restored and mounted. And he is absolutely every much a hero as his father was. Those are his medals that I have behind me now. And when I get too old to do this lecture, I hope one of my sons or one of my daughters does it, and they will clearly inherit all of these in the hope that they will keep this memory alive. We're coming to the sort of tail end of our lecture. And I just want to have a sort of review of what happened and why. These are some Sosabowski quotes. The Germans, what are the Germans? He knew that if Arnhem Bridge was important to the Allies, then the Germans would know it was important to them too. And he pointed out to Boy Browning, an airborne operation is not a purchase by installments. When he went back for the first commemoration, he didn't have a passport because he was stateless. And the well-meaning passport officer said, "Where's your passport?" He said, I don't have one. And he said, "Well, you can't come in then." So he, in his own acerbic way, said, "You didn't ask for my bloody passport the last time I came here." And they let him in. This is a little screenshot from a British file. Jeremy Kemp plays the RAF intelligence officer saying, "You're landing 10 miles from the drop zone." And General Stanislaw walks up, looks at his shoulder and says, "Just checking whose side you are on." I love that quote. Brilliant. I don't know if he said it. It's the kind of thing he would have said. I also love the scene with Denholm Elliott as the kind of hapless, helpless weather officer. Sosabowski says, "The Polish drop has been cancelled again. I would like an explanation." And he says, "Well, it's fog, slippery stuff, fog. 1 minute it's there, the next minute it's not." So the general says, "Tell me why you cannot move my men and equipment 50 miles to where there's no fog." And we fight it on from there. He says, "Well, it's slippery stuff, fog. I don't want to bore you with a lot of meat, mumbo jumbo. Won't you please sit down?" But that's the thing with fog. It moves. Of course it moves. Anyway, I don't know if he said that, but the kind of thing he would have said. This is what Browning said about General Sosabowski. May have been true. He may have been difficult to work with. I'm famous for being difficult to work with in my workplace. I think unable to adapt himself to the level of a parachute brigade commander is a bit of a stretch. And then we really get quite nasty, quite incapable of appreciating the urgent nature of the operation, and continually showing himself both argumentative and loath to place full part. Despicable. Montgomery said, "The Poles performed very badly, and the men showed no keenness to fight if it meant risking their own lives. Vis-a-vis, without using the C word, he's calling them cowards. There we go. There's a cipher, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. The Polish should by now be back in the UK. So I'm so sorry. I unwisely used the mouse to try and show you what I was trying to show you. The Polish Brigade showed no keenness to fight if it meant risking their own lives. Send them to Italy. There's the full cipher. We've discussed that. And then he said, if the operation had been properly backed, but for the presence of the Panzers, I remain its unrepentant advocate. I had to make the font size smaller to show you the decorations for General Stanislaw Sosabowski. These are currently in Warsaw. I'll tell you about some of the most latter the decorations very, very shortly. I have to say the Dutch are sometimes more Dutch than Nicholas Copernicus because they show gratitude to the Poles that spilled their blood. If you go to Driel, you will see Sosabowski Plain, which is a street named after him. In Poland, the 6th Airborne Brigade is named after General Sosabowski. And my mate, Thomas Piekarski, he's a good friend of mine. He's retired from the brigade, but he very kindly sent me some pictures of him. This is the modern Polish para. And I don't know about you, but I wouldn't like it if I saw that guy coming in, parachuting on me to put me to sleep. So Thomas, I hope you're there, buddy. Lovely, lovely, lovely to speak to you on the phone today as well. More pictures from the 6th Air Assault Brigade. It was pointed out to me these pictures are about 15 years out of date, so I will replace them for the next time. But what you can see is some really badass soldiers you would want to mess with. These are pictures of the funeral. And look, yeah, 1967, so he was buried in Poland, even when Poland was communist, because, you know, dead men can't talk. You can see his son solemnly standing there, and that's another movie that I can't show you. That is our military funeral, a military vault. Rather gloomily, I have to say there's a space reserved for me, but yeah, okay. Dorota Sosabowska, my uncle's wife, ensures it's always clean and respected, and it is respected. It's respected by the 6th Air Assault Brigade, or the 6th Airborne Brigade, who hold it very close to their hearts. So, but nevertheless, it's gratifying to see it. And now, as we come to sort of really the tail end, we've got 12 minutes, ladies and gentlemen. These are caricatures taken from a book that was written by one of the brigade, who was an artist, Old Sosa, and it shows how fondly he was held by his soldiers. I'll just leave that slide there for a minute. It's for the Poles amongst you. You can read it in Polish. This is taken from one of his books, The Shortest Way. All his books are effectively biographical in nature. If you want to get a Sosabowski book, you can get Freely I Served, which has just been reprinted by Pen and Sword publishers, where he tells the story through his eyes. But this is it in English. My life was tough. My life was tough and fallow. I don't regret what I experienced, and if I was told to go again the same way, I wouldn't hesitate to do that. How many of us can say that? How many of us can say, no matter what the injustice done to me, I would do the same again? And yeah, so every now and then someone says, oh, you're trying to make a name for yourself, buddy. You know, I'm not. If I can be 10% what they were, you know, I'm happy. These are various Sosabowski memorabilia. This is the 10 zloty coin. I think it was a commemorative coin. It was in circulation, but this is a sterling silver one. And my friend, Christoph Mashala from Turner Thai TV, kindly sent me this picture of the Polish 210 zloty stamp, which was a part of a series of stamps commemorating Polish war heroes, Sosabowski, Anders, Maciek, and so forth, and quite right too. His uniform is at the Polish Army Museum. That's his beret, that's his gapa, that's his tunic, and that's the real McCoy, the real thing. And these are just pictures of him, so we can kind of just mentally celebrate his life. There's his Virtuti Militari with his cross swords on the oak leaf, a colorized picture of the brigade. We've got 10 minutes now to show you how things went from being awful to being a little bit better, because things changed in 2003. First of all, I need to tell you about the ongoing work of some Dutchmen and others who made it their business to ensure that the Polish memory wasn't forgotten. My dear friend, Eric van Tilburg, who gives a cracking lecture, and I'm sure mine pales into insignificance. He has spent his life collecting memorabilia, in particularly papers, paperwork, documentation. If it's not written down, it didn't happen, and that's Eric for you. Arno Baltussen, I hope Arno's here, because he is one of these quiet heroes. Every year, he makes sure there's a commemoration. He ensures that the veterans come to drill. There's somewhere for them to stay. You know, the ongoing, non-glory seeking, quiet, self-effacing chap that Arno is. And he's quite rightly wearing his gold badge of the ZPS, and he deserves much, much more, as does Eric. And I think the Polish government has decorated both of them. He's the cousin of Cora Baltussen, who will be coming up in discussion later on. This is Gertjan Lasje. He was the journalist that helped start the change, because he made a documentary called God Bless Montgomery. And the Vergeten Polen in the Slag of Arnhem, the forgotten Poles in the place of Arnhem, aka God Bless Montgomery. He wasn't having it. He said, how dare we forget? These foreigners came to our country and spilt their blood, their lives for our freedom. And I'll find a way with Ben to make these videos available. But this guy is a Dutch hero. He basically wouldn't be happy. And the I can't remember the order it happened in, but Prince Bernhard found out about it. And once the royalty had found out of it, there was no going back. In that film, there's an interview with Cora Baltussen, and she describes how a young 19-year-old Pole was dying under her care. He was clearly going to die. And in his last 2 minutes of life, he said, please send my love to my home country that I'll never visit, and my love to my family. And I bear no bitterness to the Germans that tried to kill me, because all men are brothers. And we worry about traffic jams or phones or emails or having the latest computer. He was dying, and he said, I bear no malice. Joanna Pichkiewicz, she made Ona Generala. It's a Polish film about the Poles. That's on YouTube. Please watch it. And if you aren't crying by the end of it, you have no soul. Because this guy, Alan Maszkowiak, he's interviewed, and he burst into tears. An old man, he said, our general was taken away from us. How dare they treat our splendid General Stanislaw? And he died about 3 years ago. This guy, he runs the Market Garden Foundation, Andries Hoekstra. He made his business to research every single dead Pole. He wrote a book, All Men Are Brothers, and every single Pole, their gravestone is photographed, and there is a Polish and English biography. He gave a voice to the men that had no voice. And I think that's heroic. And with his mate, Frans Amalan of the Market Garden Foundation, these are Dutchmen who are honouring Poles and in their own way being heroic. In 2006, in Den Haag, all the veterans were brought first class by the Dutch government, as were my family and I. And there was a parade, and Queen Beatrix awarded to the 6th Air Assault Brigade, as it was then, the Willems Order. Willems Order is like the Congressional Medal of Honor. It is like the Victoria Cross. There is no higher order. And all the surviving legionnaires of the Willems Order came. Heroic soldiers. And there was a lovely, the front row with these like disparate soldiers who had, and there's 12 of them. That's how rare it was. And she awarded the Willems Order to the brigade, and it sits now on their standard, which is the standard of the 1st Independent Polish Parachute Brigade. And you can see them then. They paraded the Willems Order with their colour, and I think that's such a beautiful, beautiful picture. Look at those guys, you know, lantern-jawed Polish powers. You know, really, it makes me proud to have 50% Polish blood, and a little bit insignificant, I have to say, since the most dangerous thing I get in my occupation is a paper cut. My father and my uncle, the twin sons of Dr. Major Sosabowski, receiving on behalf of General Stanislaw the Bronze Lion. This is now in Hartenstein Museum, which is it's not quite the Willems Order, but it was beautiful. They gave him this, it's like the George Cross, I think, in terms of the brigade as a whole was given the Willems Order and its commander was given the Bronze Lion. Let me talk about this, and we are in the tail end. We literally are in the last 5 minutes. I unveiled this memorial in Driel in 2006, and the money that was raised to pay for it was raised by not a Pole, not a Dutchman, a Brit, Major Tony Hibbert. And it grieves me to think that this old man, who should have been in his garden or going to seminars or playing golf, he was spending his time trying to undo a wrong. He spent his last years, and he died before it happened, trying to get the British establishment to retract the awful slanders, libels that they'd cast upon the brave Poles. And he died not knowing that had happened, because it hasn't happened. The Poles, however, are very careful to decorate those who are deserving of such decoration. And I was a mere messenger for my family in 2018, where I went to collect the Order of the White Eagle, the highest Polish decoration for General Sosabowski. And that's President Duda presenting it to me. To my stunned surprise, my children, as were then, wanted to come, and they were interested. And I'm so delighted, because my lecturing days will be over soon, not soon, 30 years. They will have to clutch the laser pointer from my cold, dead fingers. But look at that, my little girl, my boys, I think they should have got a haircut in a military environment. It's not really a place to like curly big hair, but the reality is they came, and there was a lovely ceremony. In the top right-hand corner, that's Jeremy Sosabowski. So it was a Sosabowski fest. And that is the order, which I currently have. And it's beautiful. It's just, that's the legitimacia. There's 223s of these given out ever. And he's one of them. We did a lovely tour of Poland, and Sosabowski is a hero in Poland, as he should be. That's the park near the house where he lived. And you can see some little Sosabowskis and my kick-ass sons trying to look mean with their haircuts in front of the statue of the general. This is the latest Sosabowski. She's just turned 1. And it's not that I thought her mama had questions to answer. Of course she didn't. But, I mean, I'm a guy. We always wonder. And so I looked at her and I thought, you're a Sosabowski, right? And then I thought, yeah, you are. Look at the frown. The reality is she has the Sosabowski frown and her mama's got no questions to answer as far as I'm concerned. And I just couldn't resist putting that picture to show I'm a Sosabowski. I'm not an imposter-bowski. And almost to the minute, I've spent 2 hours talking at you and with you. And that's my privilege. So I will finish with this, which is a misquote, because it's the last scene from A Bridge Too Far, which probably didn't happen, when all the major players, Gavin, Sosabowski, Horrocks, Vandeleur, and Browning are standing. They can see Arnhem from where they are. And he said, so that's it, we're pulling out. It was Nijmegen, meaning the bridge. Vandeleur says it was the road getting to Nijmegen. Horrocks says, this is Edward Fox, no, it was after Nijmegen. Browning says, looking at Sosabowski, and the fog in England, a reference to the Poles who were delayed. And Sosabowski says, it doesn't matter what it was. When one man says to another, I know what, let's do today, let's play the war game. Everybody dies. He didn't say it. It's the kind of thing he would have said. And that's my story, or it's not my story, it's my account of 2 other people's story. What I will do for you is I will arrange with Ben some method whereby you can download the PDF of the lecture slides, because there's far too much to have in one day. That's my pledge to you. It might take a bit of time, but if there's one thing we might have, it's time. What you can do for me is, this lecture needs to be told. I gave a tour of Holland. I haven't given it in Poland. I know there's lots of Poles listening. I haven't done a tour of the United States. Let's do it. Let's find a way of making sure this story is never forgotten. If you're the age I'm at, some of you will be, we have a duty in our sort of middle age, our upper middle age, to ensure that the next generation of soldiers or families of soldiers remember what it's like, but also the non-soldiers remember the debt they have, because life isn't about iPhones and TikTok and Instagram and Facebook. Life is about the sacrifices they made when literally they didn't know if they'd live till next week and they were eating rats. So on that note, I am going to ask you, if you've got a drink, to have it in your hand, and in a minute, Ben and I, when we can see everyone, will ask to raise a glass to the general, the major, the Poles, and all the soldiers who fought in the Second World War in general, and at Operation Market Garden in particular. I now hand the floor back to our host, Ben, and I hope we can maybe see some folks who are going to raise their hands, because now we have as much time as you want for Q&A. Ben, the floor is yours, with my gratitude.
Hal, thank you very much. That was fantastic. I apologize. I am still a neophyte on how to do these webinars. So if I can't get everybody seen, I'll just ask everybody to still raise a glass to the general. But right before we kick off and do that, do you want to raise a toast to the general in the brigade and then handle Q&A, or do we want to jump into Q&A first, Hal?
Well, let's do a toast. Well, let's have a drink now. And I want to just tell you my little tip for Zoom meetings. You have your coffee cup and you go as if it's coffee, but of course it isn't coffee, is it? It's wine, all right? So many a meeting I've had at work, no, sorry. I'm the general's great-grandson, I can say what I like. So raise your glasses, please, to General Sosabowski, Major Sosabowski, the troops of the 1st Polish Independent Parachute Brigade, and all of those who gave their lives or risked their lives at Arnhem, but also to the military around the world. We cannot forget the debt we owe them. Cheers.
Cheers.
I'll hand back to Ben. Ben will facilitate the Q&As and the comments. Let's have commentary. If you know something I haven't said, let's hear it. My pen is here. I want to know about it because I'm not an expert.
So we have about 6 questions sitting in the Q&A right now, Hal. And so I tried to handle a couple of them as you were giving the
Okay.
lecture, but I still want to open up the floor to them right now. So the first one was you've touched on both the intelligence failure going into Market Garden and also the lack of communications. And the question is, if you could expound upon that a little bit, and I apologize for pausing because that's basically the gist of the first question. But just to set it up a little bit more, was there a means to update the intelligence once the engagement started to be able to provide information back? We realized that the comms challenges certainly made that far more difficult, but there appears to have been no deviation from a set schedule regardless of what was happening on the ground once the operation commenced. We understand why there was an intelligence failure because no one was listening to Major Urquhart, but is there any information on why there were no updates once things were happening on the ground and it was clear the plan was not going to unfold the way it was envisioned?
No, I mean, that's a really good point, and I think I need to do some research on this. Why didn't the military command, the overseers of the operation, realise what was going on? The RAF were dropping, but they weren't allowed, in the absence of any other information, to change their drop zone. So even though the soldiers were trying to signal that the drop zones had been overrun, the RAF dropped it anyway. But this was happening on several fronts. The intelligence from the Dutch underground, which was independently corroborated with flypasts, that was ignored. And that went all the way up to at least Montgomery, and probably higher. But there's a psychological doctrine called groupthink, whereby everyone starts trying to think the same way and pushing their doubts to one side. It's like confirmation bias. It happened with the Challenger, even though they knew the Challenger shouldn't launch. There were so many good reasons to launch it. Let's just forget about the fact that we're launching it at temperatures far below its design spec. So certainly the untested radios, certainly the ignoring of the intelligence. But as you wisely point out, once they discovered these things, was there not a means to inform and regroup and reset a little bit? So I suspect on Twitter, I'll get some answers to that. And potentially it's one thing I'm going to write down in terms of doing my research for the next lecture.
Just as a trained military staff officer, if you're doing, and I realize the speed at which operations are unfolding, but you should always have branches and sequels once the enemy gets its vote. And it appears as nobody gave any consideration to what those branches or sequels should look like if the reality on the ground deviated from what people thought they were going to see.
Yes.
The second question that came up was regarding the drop zone selection. We understand from the film, and it was actually pretty realistic, that the ground tactical plan was driven by drop zone selection. That was driven by a desire by 1st Allied Airborne Army to preserve its aircraft. And the question was, if the Allies had achieved air superiority, if not supremacy, by gutting the Luftwaffe by this late in the war, was there really that much of a threat to the aircraft? It's my understanding that it wasn't so much a concern about the Luftwaffe as it was about anti-aircraft batteries that could be emplaced in the vicinity of Arnhem. Is there any additional information on what drove that concern to preserve the aircraft? What threat were they really focused on?
Okay, I'm reminded of that scene with Jeremy Kemp when he's explaining to the Allied commanders where the drop zones are and why they can't drop closer. So 2 key things. There was a particular area of anti-aircraft fire around Arnhem, which as the aircraft were turning round, as the towing aircraft were turning round, would have run into. There was some marshy ground unsuitable for gliders, and that was the other thing. But the closest viable drop zone was the 8 miles away from, thank you, that was from Mark Hughes. There was a heavy AA battery near the airfield. Perfect, thank you very much. And please feel free, because normally we have a gallery view, but I can just see myself and Ben. Ben, is there any way we can have the participants showing a little bit as well? Because I'd like some input from them. But I think the anti-aircraft plus the unsuitable ground meant that there had to be drop zones 8 miles away from the bridge, which I'm not a para. I've never jumped any higher than my staircase. As paras, your toes must be curling because the whole point is it's an element of surprise. The diving eagle, you dive onto your enemy, you surprise them. It's not a purchase by installments. Where have I heard that before?
No, exactly. And the challenge again, when you go back to planning, it's always, can you suppress air defenses enough to keep your aircraft safe? It was probably a little simpler 75 years ago than it is in this day and age of ground air missiles and things like that. But at the same time, if you can't get the paratroopers in the vicinity of the objective, don't launch an airborne operation is the bottom line.
Okay. Janusz says, "Where's the standard kept now?" I've just worked out how to pull the questions up.
I'll let you run it from there then, Hal.
Okay. So Janusz Marszewski. Dzień dobry. Jak się czujesz? The standard, as I believe it, is the standard is at the headquarters of the 6th Airborne Brigade in Poland. I'll be happy to be proved wrong on that. And Lewis Weaver, no, thank you, Lewis. How do we right the wrong which was done? It can be achieved. Okay, the Poles and the Dutch have achieved it. I just wish the British would. I just think when you say something bad about proud soldiers, what is it about Poles? Poles come here, coming over here, delivering our mail, painting our houses, picking up our Poles. They're just a lovely race, and I don't understand why. Especially in the times in which we live, the Australian government made an apology to the Aboriginal inhabitants. It's not difficult. In fact, it's disarming. It's so disarming. Once you apologize, you can't be criticized anymore. Just do the right thing, come on. So Lewis, good point, buddy. Alan says, didn't they ramp up the AT to deal with tanks? But I don't know what AT is. So Lewis, Alan, can you clarify your question?
I'll jump in on that one. That would have been anti-tank weaponry.
Okay.
Anti-tank guns brought in by glider.
Okay. I'm sure they would have done, but the problem was for the Poles, a lot of their kit was dumped north of the river when they were south, and the ferry had been moved. I'm sure the 1st Airborne would have had some sort of what's an anti-tank gun called? A Piat. Piat? They were using Piats, personal infantry anti-tank weapon. Was the general involved in the War of 1920? I don't know. There we go. That's disarming. The miracle on the Vista. I'll have to look into that. And I do need to freshen up the first bit of the lecture. But Mike Russell, my good friend Mikey Russell, Colonel Russell, he's writing a book on that. So I'm going to get into that straight away. Many drops were cancelled because of the fog. How did displaced persons from Poland and Germany get recruited into the 1st Polish Independent Parachute Brigade? I don't understand the question particularly. The brigade was not that picky. If you had 2 arms and 2 legs, you had a good chance. And particularly for the brigade, which wasn't Paszkiewicz or Maczek's selection, as long as you were prepared to obey orders, it was a bit like the French Foreign Legion. No, we're not going to ask that many questions as long as you're so on and so forth. Why couldn't they drop supplies on the same site? I don't know. In a minute, I'm going to see if I can find Mike Russell. I think sometimes if you're dropping supplies with paratroopers, and again, I'm going to ask Ben to put his expertise into this. It's dangerous. You can't have heavy crates and paratroopers dropping to the same DZ. Ben, can we have some input on that, or any other paras? Why did the supplies get dropped north and the paras dropped south?
Well, I think the biggest challenge would have been what drop zones were still considered safe at that time. Number one, where they could recover the equipment. As you so rightly pointed out, so much equipment landed in German hands to begin with. But then additionally, it sounds as though there was a lot of reverting back to that groupthink again. We have a plan. These are the DZs. Here's where we're going to drop them. So if the troops couldn't cross the river to get to support the folks fighting at the bridge, there was no way supplies were going to get there. But I don't think anybody was putting 2 and 2 together on that. The idea was, these are the drop zones. Here's what we're going to do. and they continue to reinforce that without updating the intelligence on the ground and determining where the correct place to get this equipment would be, and a safe place so it could be distributed and used. That's kind of my take on it.
Okay. I told you that Mike Russell was here. I credited him earlier on, and I like Mike Russell's like Jimmy Cricket on my shoulder. He always tells me when I'm wrong, and he's now pointed out the standard is at the Sosabowski Institute in London. So if you can get to the Sosabowski Institute when it opens, and it opens even on non-COVID times, it opens for a few hours, go and see it. Go to the Sosabowski Institute, go to Exhibition Road to the Polish restaurant, and go to the Posk Polish Center restaurant. There's some nice places. I know you're all stateside, but as soldiers or interested parties for the 82nd, these are places we can go and have nice Polish food, but also see some Polish history. Mike, that's great, buddy. Thank you very much for that. Alan Rhodes says anti-tank. Thank you, buddy. And yeah, the Poles didn't have the kits, but the units drop did. Thank you very much. Christina, oh, I'm so sorry, Christina. To my undying shame, I don't speak Polish. Now I need to discuss this. I get criticised on Twitter or Facebook by Poles saying, "Why don't you speak Polish?" It's a reason, not an excuse. My father came to the UK when he was 2. My mother was English. He forgot his Polish. I'm not saying it's an excuse, it's a reason. And to my shame, when I go to meet the veterans, they say, "Dzień dobry, jak się czujesz?" with their big walrus moustaches. And I say, "Mate, I'm so sorry. I'm a Cockney sparrow. I can't." So, Christina, I'm very sorry. But then you said he served in a logistical unit due to the knee injury he suffered. He didn't see active duty in the Polish Bolshevik War. I'm presuming that's a reference to the general. He did suffer a knee injury from shrapnel, which is the picture I showed you when he was standing with a walking stick. This is brilliant. Would intelligence from Dutch underground have made any difference? They were obsessed. That's the point. It's called groupthink. It's when you have an idea, and no matter what evidence you get that idea isn't going to work, you carry on anyway. And the only other example I can think of is Challenger. When Challenger exploded, they almost knew it would explode. Now I think I've run out of questions, which I'm surprised at. Unless anyone can say different, because I'm working on 2 screens and so on and so forth. Well, okay. Oh no, there's a sidebar. I love these sidebars because they are contemporary. So if I can go through and comment on it, and then as people get bored, they can drop out if they want to. Gin and tonic, perfect. Thank you very much. The general is amazing. Thank you very much. And for those folks from We Have Ways, let's do the lecture on We Have Ways. And I need to get this into Poland. I've never given this to Poland, actually. Oh no, James and I'll cover this in We Have Ways. So to American colleagues, there's a British podcast called We Have Ways of Making You Talk, and I'll liaise with Ben later because it's stunning. It's so many knowledgeable historians just chatting about a certain battle or a certain. So the first airborne. Okay, so M8 says the first airborne had 6-pounders, 17-pounders, and their pilots. So that answers the question about anti-tank weaponry. And then someone says, that's it, bring up the pilots. Mike Russell says the Sikorsky Institute got the standards. Hal, the brigade, 6-pounder ATs came in the gliders on the DZL with German troops on one side and Brits on the other. Right in the middle of a firefight. The AT battery suffered 50% casualties. Buddy, thank you so much. Hopefully I can capture the text of this sidebar, Ben, because there's some really great facts here. That's from Mike Musialowski. Sorry, Mike, dziękuję, buddy. Most of the original, and Mark Hughes says the original DZs were overrun, so they had to make do. So that's just what Ben said. The DZ, the plan went to shit, effectively. You know, it's like any fist fight, the plan goes to shit. Right, the resupply was sticking to plan because they didn't know the DZ had been overrun because the radios didn't work. Vladislav says, my mother filmed the funeral of General Sosabowski at the Pulaski Military Cemetery. Clearly visible is the CO of the Keju, Joseph Rybicki, the boss of Stashinek, and my mother, Captain Antonia Mijal Bartuszewska. See, that's when it gets really personal. No, it is, and Mike and Janusz says, thank you for the update of the standard. It's about time. Go to the Sikorski if you can. If you want to, get some Polish culture, go to the Sikorski, then get on the tube and have dinner at the Polish restaurant in Exhibition Road or the POSK Polish Centre. I will, so Lewis, thank you, buddy. If I'm invited to and I'd like to, I'll do the full lecture on We Have Ways. I know it's long, and every now and then people say, can you make it a bit shorter? No, I can't. If it's worth telling in its entirety, and Ben was really good about it. He said, can you just give us 10 minutes? No, mate, 2 hours. I'm joking. He said, give us the whole 2 hours. So We Have Ways is my next target. 17 powders are the most powerful anti-tank asset. They'll punch a tiger. Okay, so please realize, and this is good, Christina, Chitin massacre was executed at various locations in the Western USSR in the spring of 1940. So what she's saying is, I've got my dates wrong, which is absolutely fine. 1943 was the announcement of the discovery of graves. Okay, I'll absolutely update that slide. It's very, very important. And I can only get this 100% right with comments like that. Right, so Stefan Vielka, Britannia. Question from a brigade soldier's grandson. Would you think it'd be suitable for the 6th Airborne Brigade to adopt the grey-coloured original beret rather than the current red? What a lovely idea. Well above my pay grade, but I'm hoping that opinion formers who know are present and may consider it.
Hey, Hal, let me jump in on that one real quick. Sure. Not that I know anything about what the 6th Brigade is planning on doing, but the maroon beret, since its inception with the English paras, that has become like the international symbol for a para. I mean, I wore a maroon beret when I was an American paratrooper. If you see a soldier wearing a maroon beret, you don't have to even look for jump wings normally. So I'd be a little bit surprised. But at the same time, not that my opinion matters, I think that that's a brilliant idea. And I would love to see them wearing the traditional gray beret, because that would be an amazing callback to the origins of that fantastic organization.
Brilliant. So Richard, question, did any of the other leading Allied commanders come to the defense of the Poles and or your great-grandfather? No. Roy Urquhart, bless him, said in a letter, the Poles provided a useful contribution. Now, the thing is, you have to understand as Americans, British understatement, all right? Useful doesn't mean useful. Useful means barely adequate. I'm a bit put out means I'm incandescent with rage. I'm feeling a bit poorly means I'm going to die in 10 minutes. And so to say a useful contribution is a little bit warm praise. And so, no, because my great-grandfather, he didn't speak English properly. He was the only one who didn't speak English properly. He was a little bit abrasive. He rubbed sparks off people, much like I do. I'm sure it's the DNA, Sosabowski DNA. It was very easy to park it all on him, all right? So I'm not going to cower behind it was racist, but it was quite easy to kind of, look, mate, you're not one of us. We take flowers to the remembrance. I am delighted to hear that. And someone says the 17 powder's got a higher muzzle velocity than the 88 millimeter. See, these are facts I need to have. I'm so sorry that someone had to go. So yeah, the problem isn't the weapons, it's the ammunition. The ammunition the Paras had is 150 rounds for their arms. So it was the lack of ammunition. It's maroon, not red, I agree. Indeed, a number of tigers were taken down near the river by one, particularly 17-pounder. There's some history available. There's a lovely tour. If you go to Arnhem, there's a lovely tour. You pay a few euros. You can do a lovely tour of Arnhem with Wibo Boersma. Wibo Boersma is a Dutchman he runs the he's a staff of the Hartenstein, and when I went there to do, gave a lecture tour. Bless his heart, he just looked after me. He gave me the whole tour, me and him. He just looked after me. Did any of the ground troops, Major Caps, not come to the defense of the Poles at the end of the day? No, they didn't. Fuller was, oh, okay, thank you, that's interesting. Someone said that Brian Urquhart, Fuller in the film, he was put on sick leave, but he did participate in Market Garden. I didn't know that. I thought he was sent away. How many Poles were captured? I think I'd said that on my lecture. I can't remember. Was it 500? I'll have to refer back to my lecture. 1940 medal, excellent point. Logistics is crucial. It's all about the logistics. It's nothing except the logistics. So that's a really lovely set of Q&As. I'm just going to have a look at the other Q&As which have been filling up as we've been talking. And there are none. So Ben, I can offer it for concluding remarks. We've got 79 participants still, at least on certainly on Zoom, and any number on the YouTube link. So yeah, Ben, over to you, buddy.
Just a couple more quick questions and then we can wrap this up. There was one question on whether the general ever made it back to Scotland or whether the brigade ever actually held reunions post-war.
Right.
Where they, you know,
I'm as certain as I can. It would have been a standard thing for him to go back to Scotland. There's no big deal about that. And on my sort of later slides, I talked about the general Stan the Stormman during the week, but General Stanislaw at the weekend. So he went and gave seminars all over the UK and probably all over Europe or Western Europe anyway. So I've no doubt that he did. And there would have been any number of brigade reunions.
Outstanding. Now, one final question from Ian W., and then we'll wrap it for questions. And just comes back to the intelligence point. Ian asked whether intelligence from the Dutch underground would have made any difference, or whether the Allied High Command would continue to have been obsessed by a victory fever in late '44. And the movie shows, you know, the Dutch underground providing information. And I don't know how much of that was, and to take nothing from the Dutch underground, but I don't know how much of that in the movie was for human interest or how much viable intelligence was actually making it back to the Allies. Do you have anything to say about that, Hal?
Sorry, but I just tuned out a little bit, so I'm looking at the chat. Say that again.
No, I was just saying, so the movie shows the Dutch underground providing information back, counting tanks, communicating by clandestine radio, and obviously they were there making a valuable contribution. But do you know how much intelligence was actually making it from civilians and underground people into the Allied military intelligence apparatus?
There was a fair amount. The Dutch were, they were overrun, but they were brave. They were fighting for their country. I just don't know that it was taken that seriously. And certainly with regard to the SS presence in Arnhem, not only did they find that intelligence and confirm it, they were completely ignored. So, but again, that's something that the film alludes to that I gloss over, but that's a really good point. I'm going to write down here about the role of the Dutch intelligence. And I'd quite like to find out if they did defuse the bomb on the explosive on the Nijmegen Bridge, because there's a suggestion that they did.
Yes, sir. And there's a comment by MH that, and also from 1940 Metal, that the British were worried that the Dutch underground may have been compromised, and which could have caused interpretations. And there was also some concern about political implications of relying on that intelligence. So that may be a couple of things to investigate for the future as well, Prof.
Yes, amazing. Someone said, I'm doing an impression on why General Bissell did not destroy the Van Vliet report on the Keitel massacre. And so, and then Mike Russell is, Colonel Russell's a personal friend, and B, a learned scholar in this regard. Nobody in the chain of command questioned Browning's report to the chief of the Imperial General Staff, was not questioned, nor its veracity confirmed. It's surprising that it did not go through General Brereton. There was no meeting between Browning and Montgomery after the battle, so the disgraceful cipher was not questioned either. Someone had to be blamed, and the Poles were easy target. When I accompanied Dr. Marek Stella-Sawicki, he's another lecturer. There's a group of us, and the terrible competition between us, each of us thinking we're better than the other. He went to Warsaw with our documentary Debt of Dishonor. Watch that film. Mike Russell helped make it. I was still a serving colonel, and I was briefed on what I could and could not say. There are huge sensitivities. Amateurs talk tactics from MH, professionals speak supplies. It is about logistics, supply lines. Thank you, Ben. In my opinion, the whole plan was formed. The reliance on a single road, brilliant. There's plenty of reunions from Helena, so that answered your question. Dutch intelligence was viewed as suspect due to political implications, and the British worried that Dutch underground was compromised by the Germans, so they didn't take it as seriously. And Ben says, we're wrapping shortly. So the Polish Parachute Association, who awarded me this, they do have get-togethers. The lady that organised it, I phoned her last time I did this lecture. I need to write to her because she can't hear very well, Mrs. Hrinkiewicz, but she was a lovely. Let's just go. No, Tony Hibbert was the only real Brit who made a difference. So I've reached the bottom of the chat. I'll hand back to Ben. This has been my pleasure. I've had a lovely, lovely evening. Half an hour of Q&As. What a lovely, lovely activity. Ben, over to you.
Thank you, Hal. Hal, on behalf of the all signal chapter of the 82nd Airborne Association, and just on behalf of paratroopers everywhere, thank you so much for preserving the legacy of your great-grandfather, your grandfather, the Polish paras everywhere. I've come to Polish history quite late in my examination of World War II, which is, when I think about it now, I'm very embarrassed about, because, the Poles were there from day one fighting off Nazi aggression and doing it with such valor and such professionalism. I'm wearing a special tie today in honor of them. It's gray with maroon stripes for First Independent Polish Para Brigade and their connection with the International Airborne. And so once again, thank you very much. Your great-grandfather is a personal hero of mine, and I draw great inspiration from him.
Okay, so as I say, just send me, we'll chat between us afterwards and have a post-match analysis. I've really enjoyed the evening.
Hey, thank you very much. So everybody, this has been Ben Powers with the Commander's Voice. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm going to keep this live stream up a little bit to make sure we can wrap it at YouTube. There's about a 20-second delay between Zoom and YouTube, so those watching on YouTube will get to see the end of the presentation. Thank you very much. Folks in Europe, have a great evening. Folks in the United States, have a great afternoon. And if you're watching from anywhere else in the world, I think we had at least one person from Singapore. Have a great weekend wherever you are. Cheers. Thank you.
Okay, Ben, I'll stay here as well in case there's any questions you have or anyone else has, just for the post. I'm quite happy to sit here for a bit.
Thank you, sir.
We've still got 36 participants and we've got some questions. Are you all right if I just answer the chats as they come up, Ben? Can you hear me, Ben? Can anyone hear me? Just someone on the chat say if you can hear me, because I'll... Thank you, Mac. Perfect. I just want to talk about, there's some lovely questions coming up. I just want to comment on them while we're all here. Fife is brilliant. I loved my time in Fife. There's some commentary about so MH says, one thing was a little surprising was the images of the Polish Home Army. That was Dariusz Krakowiak, he's a soldier, an Polish Special Forces soldier. He gave me those images, and it is surprising. I have no information about who was put into resettlement camps. Chris in Wimborne, my grandfather lived in Coal Hill near Wimborne, so it has a place close to my heart. Jonathan Wilwood, tell the guys at We Have Ways, let's get this on We Have Ways. And when you say MH, the images show them in Waffen SS camo smocks. Do you mean the AK? Because if that's the case, I need to look into that, because maybe we've got an incorrect image. But veteran accounts from the Polish to disprove Monty's assertion. Every single effing veteran will say it. Oh, Christopher Brown. My grandfather, the Major, used to live in Haslop Road in Coal Hill, and I spent happy times in the summer staying with them. It's such a lovely, perfect place to be. It's very evocative. So Coal Hill has got close to my heart. And MH says you do not have to check the photo because the AK used a lot of captured German equipment. That explains it. See, it's a learning experience for me too, buddy. This is great. Love it. So that's the end of the chat. So, it's not the end. There's one more. Who's pissed? Alan's just pissed off.